Hello and welcome everyone to Ananke's third edition of Women in Literature Festival. I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Ushah Kazi, who is a Pakistani Canadian writer and content creator. She has written extensively about Pakistani and South Asian culture for Pakistani and North American publications. She has also published a book about Pakistan's turbulent film industry titled The Pop Culture Junkie's Guide to Pakistani Cinema. She's based out of Pakistan. So welcome, Ushah.
Thank you so much, Samin. And thank you so much for inviting me to be part of and deliver a keynote address for the Women in Literature Festival by Ananke. I think I'm not the only one who's really excited to be living in a time when you guys exist and you do all that you do. Hello, everyone. My name is Ushah Kazi, and I will be speaking about digital disruptions, particularly focusing on print and the intersection of print and digital. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, so we're going to be talking about content, digital disruption, and particularly how print media and digital media coexist and what the future can look like. So a little bit about me. My name is Ushah Kazi. I am a writer, a content creator, an entrepreneur, and cliched though may it sound, I do identify as a storyteller as well. My journey actually began before I was born, when more than 30 years ago, my family started the Sindhi daily newspaper Daily Kavish. It continues to be the largest circulated Sindhi daily of Pakistan. And I became involved in it in various facilities of the newspaper from a very young age. I was around 15 years old when I began writing for publications outside of Kavish. And when I did, whatever I read on the pages of Kavish informed the kinds of topics that I was covering. When I was at university, a lot of things happened that fundamentally shifted how I was as a writer and the kind of stuff that I would write about and what topics interested me. First, I was writing for Metroland Media, in particular for their South Asian focused magazine, Sohag. It is a magazine that covers South Asian culture, fashion, and really focuses on the diaspora within North America with a particular interest in Canada. Because of writing for Sohag, I was focusing a lot on entrepreneurship and South Asian culture, particularly things like Bollywood, the film industry, and what have you. Simultaneously, I was writing for Western Social Sciences Leadership and Democracy Lab, and my team was focusing on the Afghanistan-Pakistan region. So that introduced me to the political economy of the region. And when I put those two things together, as I'm sure you can imagine, I was focusing a lot on how political economy impacts culture, and particularly the documentation of culture. Simultaneously, I was also writing for Pakistani publications. And this opened me up to how Pakistan writes about and comments on its own culture. Another interesting thing that happened around this time is that because of everything that I was writing about and all of the topics that I was focusing on, I began working on my first book, The Pop Culture Junkie's Guide to Pakistani Cinema. It was published before I actually graduated. And the whole intent behind it was that it was a very millennial understanding, and as the title explains, a guide to understanding our cinema. Because the more research I conducted in this particular topic, the more I realized that it is incredibly turbulent, as Sabine rightfully said, but it's also a very resilient part of our pop culture, our popular culture, and something that I felt that a lot of Pakistanis, particularly young Pakistanis, could draw inspiration from. At that time, there was also still conversations about the quote-unquote rebirth of Pakistani cinema. Those conversations have become more and more nuanced since this book was published, but it was an attempt for me to capture a moment in time when we were talking about Pakistani cinema in a very specific manner. Perhaps the most important thing that happened to me at this time was that I made it to the finals of the World's Challenge, which, if you don't know what that is, it's an international competition where university students compete in teams to address specific problems that the world is encountering and come up with ideas for how to solve them. My idea was for a digital startup that focused on citizen journalism and, in particular, would allow individuals to tell their own stories. We did not win that year, but the fact that top academics within Western and from other universities across North America were interested in the idea of people telling their stories, not just the intersection of technology and journalism, but also in the idea of people having the ability and the capabilities to tell their own stories, made me realize that there really is something in that. And so that intersection of pop culture, digital content, content creation, journalism, and entrepreneurship continues to be a place that I call home. And it was one that really informed my decisions when I acquired Women's Own magazine last year. Women's Own continues to be one of the most iconic publications in Pakistan, at least ones that are written in the English language. And because of that, there's been a lot of documentation in the pages of Women's Own with respect to Pakistani culture. So when I made the decision to acquire this magazine last year, I really was taking on something that my mother had read, that her mother had read before her, and really something that I grew up reading as a child growing up in Pakistan as well. But at the same time, when I did in fact acquire this magazine, we were no longer in the 1980s, the 1990s. We weren't even in the early 2010s. We were a post-pandemic people, and we were really grappling with a lot of new realities. So I knew that digitization had to play an important part in my journey with this magazine. But I didn't just want to focus on the digitizing of the content, but I instead wanted to also take inspiration from the champions of Pakistan's emerging creative industries. And I would like to go over some of my favorite stories that we've covered over the course of the past couple of months, and what inspirations you all can derive from them. This started with our very first cover star, Momina Munir, and her, to quote her, super random success story. Momina is someone who is incredibly open about all of the struggles that she goes through as a young woman living in Pakistan. She blatantly talks about how she's not, um, you know, really good at certain aspects of content creation that I think a lot of people focus on, be it cinematography or things like that. She talks openly about her struggles with mental health. She was very forthcoming in talking about losing a friend over the course of her journey and what that did to her and how she coped with that, of being actually diagnosed with a mental health concern, and how she juggles multiple roles, from content creator to student to business owner. And she does all of this without ever making it seem like it's impossible for quote unquote super random Pakistanis to do the same. It's not a surprise to me why she is so successful in the content creation space. But when we actually sat down for an interview, I was able to gauge a lot of things about her that I think a lot of people don't realize. What's interesting about this particular issue is also that Momina had a hand in literally every single thing that you see in the pages of Women's Own with respect to her cover story. She was the one who suggested the designers that we reached out to. All of them happened to be Pakistani streetwear brands, all of them owned by young Pakistanis. She was the one who decided who the photographer should be, who also happens to be a young Pakistani girl. And the imagery, the iconography, everything takes inspiration from Gen Z culture, as she put it. Moving on, the Afro-Pakistani community is a community that is very vibrant, very present in certain parts of Pakistan. And yet a lot of Pakistanis do not even know about their existence, which I think speaks to our alienation from our own roots. There are certain aspects of our history that we are completely oblivious towards. And this community is, I would argue, a very vibrant, very beautiful representation of all of those things. So I definitely wanted to do a story about them. Initially, the intent was to, because I interact with a lot of young scholars, academics, students from the community, and I have done so for many, many years. Initially, I wanted to invite some of them to write for the magazine. But then I felt that it would be even more useful for Pakistan and for our collective culture to actually hear not just their stories, but also see a lot of the things they want to show us, right? So I reached out to a couple of members of the community. I was told about Isra Kamrani, who is our beautiful cover star, and I got to talking with her. She had been trying to get into modeling in Pakistan for a very long time. Her cousin was a makeup artist. Her name is Tuba. You can see her as well. And basically, the entire story, the magazine came out from that. We also worked with Koil for this particular issue. Koil is a Pakistani, I would argue, heritage brand that I have personally been fascinated by for many years. And their story, I felt, really worked very well with the story of the Afro Pakistani community. And the summation of this particular issue was that Isra, Tuba, and Janib, who is a young academic from the community that who helped us with the cover story that I interviewed as well, all of them have a voice and capability to tell their own story. We discussed several aspects that affect the Afro-Pakistani community that I think most of us would be completely unaware of. For example, they were very candid in talking about how their hair in particular is something that is used to dehumanize them. And we really work to make hair the focus as well. Something as simple as just giving her a hairstyle that made her feel beautiful and empowered, and using lovely block printed scarves from Koil to adorn her hair. It became a moment of empowerment for them. And I took a lot away from that issue as well. Since doing the cover shoot for Women's Zone, Isra has gone on to have a wonderful career in modeling. She has worked with some pretty prominent brands, and this is something that she continues to do as well. We also wanted to talk about the sustainability aspect with respect to fashion, because I felt that last year the floods devastated Pakistan. But what was interesting, and in large part, this is because of the new emerging technologies and how content creators and activists are using social media to really champion the causes that matter to them. We saw a lot of conversations that typically do not take place with respect to a natural calamity, at least in Pakistan. A lot of them were talking about the sustainability aspect. And in particular, Nurulada Daudpota is someone, she is a director producer, but also someone who's very, very open about the climate emergency and where Pakistan is within the global sphere as far as that is concerned. So we reached out to her. She very graciously agreed to be on the cover. Simultaneously, yet again, the Behbood Crafts is a brand and really an organization that I think a lot of us draw inspiration from, how they work with at-home workers, their focus on small batch production, their trainings for women. Everything is really, really inspiring. So I went ahead and reached out to them, and we were able to not just interview them, the team behind the brand, but they were also really, really generous and allowed us to have conversations with one of their workers. And so we printed both sides of the organization, not just the sort of the admin and managerial side of it and what their goals as an organization, really what their goals for the Behbood brands are, but also what kind of an impact they have on workers. Because at the end of the day, fashion has a human component. And it's not just the people who buy the clothes, it's also the people who create them. And the more openly Pakistan has this conversation, the better it is for us, because we really do struggle on both ends of the spectrum. It's not just that sustainability wise, we are one of the worst impacted countries when it comes to climate change globally. It's also that our workers also tend to be exploited. So we wanted to have a very nuanced and holistic conversation for this particular issue. Then we went ahead and caught up with Sabina Said. She is a wonderful actress. You might have seen her in a lot of productions for television. She's a favorite for music videos. But what I found out when I had that first meeting with her is that there are certain aspects, again, certain facets to her that we do not see, because there's a very narrow representation of women in Pakistani media. And Sabina, owing to how lovely she is to look at, they were always representing her in a very, very small bubble. To quote her from the interview that we conducted, it was always the pretty rich girl, and she had to play that part. What many people don't know is that Sabina actually has a multi-ethnic background. Part of her family is from Russia. And And so for our interview, she really wanted to talk about that and this concept of the quote unquote Renaissance woman, or someone who has various facets to their personal and professional life. Sabina is an artist, she is a writer, she is a content creator, she's also an actor. There are so many things that she wants to do, there are so many things that she has done. And over the course of this particular shoot and the cover story, we were really able to examine all of them. And it was one of my favorite shoots as well, because yet again, she was very heavily involved in how we would present her, the intersection of East meets West, but done in a way that was very true to her. We then went ahead and had our bridal issue. But I didn't just want it to be, beautiful Pakistani bridals and how lovely women look in them. Rather, I wanted to capture a moment in time. And I thought back to the time that Faiza Salim got married. And it was such a moment of joy. You can see that on pages of the magazine for that particular issue, we did actually feature some of the pictures from her wedding. This is something that she very graciously agreed to. And we wanted to present her in a way that Pakistan has seen her and fallen in love with her, but one that for some reason her career, when it comes to the kinds of roles that she's offered, we still don't see this side of her, right? So Faiza, the bride. And as she represented herself, when we were conducting the interview, the whole concept was that this is who she is. She says that I'm a bold person, I'm a fun person. I'm literally quoting her. I'm a bold person, I'm a fun person. I like to have things done my way. And if you look at her career, the trajectory of her career, she's actually a qualified lawyer, and she was really good at that academically speaking. But and again, I'm going to quote her, stronger than that was this need to perform in front of people, to have a connect with the audience. From there, she went into extempore comedy, then stand up, and then the rest we've all seen. It's a part of our continuing history. I also wanted to work with content creators in a way that is not typical with respect to the Pakistani fashion scene. And by that, what I mean is, I didn't just want them to be in front of the camera. A lot of them are very talented in other ways. And I think that we can really benefit from that as well. As I said, it's not just about posting the same content online. It's also about learning from people who have been able to use digital technologies in ways that are inspiring and that continue to inspire. So Irfan Junejo is someone who a lot of Pakistanis look up to. And in particular, he started with this idea of using photography and street photography in particular to tell stories. So we actually collaborated with him for a very interesting concept where he said that why don't we do bridals, but do them on the streets? So we organized this photo shoot with him. And through it, we also got to find out a little bit more about his process, particularly with respect to how much work he puts into every single thing that he creates, right? As he says, that quality quality comes with quantity. So the more you work, the better you get, which is something that I've realized a lot of content creators in Pakistan really do believe in that. It's about honing your craft, literally. So for them, it's not just something as informal as talking to the camera. They do very much think of it in terms of every single time I record myself, I have to get just that little bit better. So from all of this, you can gather that there are some very interesting people that we had the pleasure of interviewing. There were a lot more in the pages of Women's Own. But I also believe that there are so many other stories that we still have to tell. I'm working on an issue right now. I cannot reveal much about it, but I can tell you that there are so many fascinating people that continue to impact the culture of Pakistan. They have so much to tell us. They have so much to share with us. And I'm personally really excited about learning from them. So some questions that have come about from my journey. The first one is, what is the point of a publication? What is a publication supposed to do? Secondly, where does print fit into this mix? We are an increasingly digital world. Where does the printed magazine go? And finally, how can the digital and the physical coexist? So I'm going to answer the first question right off the bat. The point of a publication, in my understanding, and over the course of my journey, I've come to realize, is to provide perspective. Whether it is journalism, where you're just documenting or commenting on something that has happened or interviewing someone, the point is to provide your readers with a perspective. That is what a publication is supposed to do. It is about documenting, it is about curating, it is about telling that story so that 15, 20 years from now, when we look back, we understand this particular point in our history, this particular point in time, and we get a sense of what was happening and why it was happening, what people were feeling at that time, and how those feelings, emotions translated into the actions that they ended up taking. But increasingly, publications are embracing the digital. So, very recently, I was involved with the News Run, which is a news based newsletter, daily newsletter, and they also do publish a lot of writing. They're based out of the US. I have written for them many times. I continue to do that. And I was also working on their digital presence for the past couple of months. And to me, a lot more publications are embracing the idea of not just translating the same content onto a digital platform, but there are a lot of organizations that function as publications in the way that I have just said, where they provide perspective, quality writing, it's about storytelling, it is about documenting, but they exist purely in a digital space, right? So that is the reality. And so the question that comes from that is, can print survive in a digital world, right? Digital disruption is our new normal. It's not something that's going to happen. It's already happening. It's been happening. But while we make the changes that need to be made, how do we do this keeping in mind that as of 2021, Pakistan's internet penetration stood at 54%. And most of the people who use the internet in Pakistan happen to live in urban cities. There is a vast part of this country that still does not use the internet in that way. And as I have mentioned, my family has been involved in publishing and printing Kavish for many years now. I can tell you firsthand, there are lots of people that continue to rely on print because technology is just not what it is in other parts of the world. We have to be mindful of our context, right? So I'm going to make the case for print as someone who comes from a family that has championed print and as someone who has personally fallen in love with print as well. There are a few things that I do want to mention. The first is very, very simple. Print continues to employ people who have a very specific set of skills. How do we make the shift to digital entirely when a lot of those people are going to be made redundant? Because what they do and what they have done for many, many decades is with respect to this particular medium, right? Secondly, there's also permanence that comes with print versus the temporary nature of digital content. And I will share an anecdote in this regard. So, at the beginning of this presentation, I mentioned that I was 15 years old when I started reaching out to other publications and my work began appearing there. What's interesting is that one of my first articles was for Daily Times. It was about the Abdullah Shah Ghazi Mazar and about how there was a lack of security. And a lot of families that came to the Mazar, they were very worried about that. What's the way that this came about was that I was actually taking a journalism class at school, and our teacher, our instructor, had asked us if any of us wanted to write, and I wanted to write about this because he had actually arranged for a trip to the Mazar where we went ahead and interacted with people and interviewed a lot of people. So I went ahead and wrote a story. He liked it. He sent it for print, and they went ahead and printed it in Daily Times, the daily newspaper. He was working for Daily Times at that time. And I can't find that article anymore. There was a link. He shared it with me. I have been trying to access it for the past couple of years, and it doesn't work anymore. And that's just the reality of bandwidth. If whatever you have published, whatever you have created is just not important enough, it will be gotten rid of. We're also hearing stories these days about certain content, or rather streaming shows being taken off the air and people not being able to find them. So that is just the reality of the digital landscape, is that, of course, there are ways of finding these things, but sometimes they can actually be taken off. I do have a cutout of this particular article, thankfully. So because of print, I do have a copy of it. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, there are still stories that only exist in print pages. Yet again, I'm going to take the example of Kavish and Women's Own, and I can tell you that there are certain stories that were only ever covered in the print editions of these publications. You will not find them online. They don't exist. So my rather optimistic way of looking at all of this is that our future has to embrace print and digital storytelling, right? We have to tell our stories. We have to tell our stories ourselves. And we have to document what is happening and what will happen to us. And this is where print can offer permanence while digital technology ensures reach. What's interesting about my journey with Women's Zone in particular is that the people who were most likely and most excited about appearing on the pages of a print magazine that they could actually go to the store and buy were content creators, were digital creators, were people who have really gained prominence because of the digital world. They were the ones that were excited about photographing something very unique and having it printed so that they can actually have it as sort of a reminder of a time. They were the ones that were really excited about me putting them on the cover of the magazine. They were the ones that were most excited about the permanence of print because there is something about it that the digital world, I feel, just cannot replace. So I'm going to end with a quote. A story stays alive when you tell it. This is something that my 22-year-old sister said. And it's something that really resonates with me. I feel like we need to continue telling our stories. And I feel like the best way to do that would be to harness the power and the potential of digital technology, but still learn from those that came before us. And a lot of them happen to be champions of print. How we do that, as I have mentioned, is by collaborating and finding an in between space between these two worlds. So thank you so much for listening to me. And I hope you took some things away from that. I think it's muted, Sabine. I can't hear
Yes,
you.
yes. Story of our lives. But thank you so
Yeah.
much. Thank you so much for this amazing presentation. Um, I absolutely agree with you. There has to be a middle ground. Uh, Coming from a purely print background myself, I would
Yeah.
definitely agree. We need to be hybrid about it, not just print, not just the digital, but both, the best of both
Yeah.
worlds. Absolutely. So
Absolutely.
thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
Thank you so much. It was so much fun. And I really wish you guys all the best with all of your future endeavors.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.